But we've got plenty to talk about here with Rabbi David and me. Thank you for sticking around for the fireside chat. I hope it is a chat because we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is accountability, which is some people's least favorite topic. But I'm going to hope to persuade you that it's one of your favorite topics as well. Rabbi, you want to?
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So one of the things we found in the school world after COVID is parent engagement with schools has plummeted. Parents drop their kids off. They're basically outsourcing, raising their children to us. And that's been a real problem for the schools because schools can't really educate without having partnership with parents. So one of the things that I think we can talk about is how do we re-engage our parents? And I think transparency is going to be one of those things. So transparency both from the financial side of things, but also on the educational side. So personally, I published my entire budget. Private school never gets done, but I actually published my budget. Let the parents see where every dollar is going. If you've got an idea of how to make my school better, please bring it on. I'd love to save some money on our budget. So that's an idea. Let the parents actually have some vision into what's going on, and if they're able to participate, that's a way to bring it in. Talking about transparency on the pure education side, we all take standardized testing. We'll talk a little bit about the value of that, but we all take standardized testing. Why not publish the results? Not student by student, but school-wide. Why don't you work with your competitive schools? Let them publish their results. And you know what? If you're a little bit behind your competitor, you're going to work harder. You're going to improve the education, right? So let's see if we can kind of use this idea of transparency to actually push our schools forward and, most importantly, re-engage parents so that we can work better for the students.
I love the idea of transparency and getting information in the hands of many more people, where sometimes the information stays in a very small group of people. Can you tell people what your specific role is in your organization at the moment?
Sure. I'm the executive director, so I am in charge of the whole school, everything except for the curriculum itself. So I've got a lot of the financial responsibility. Got to raise about $1.5 million a year to make our budget, while at the same time in charge of all the operations of the school. We have 2 different physical campuses. We spend close to $1 million a year just on the physical maintenance of the properties. So we've got about $13 million budget for 760 students. So that works out. If you do the math, I've done the math, that's about $16,000 per student. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Most public schools are spending over $20,000 per student. If you take the local and state and federal funds that they're using, they're spending over $20,000 per student. So now you start talking about a private school scenario, and those are the numbers. And so tuition has to reflect that, and trying to collect that tuition is the challenge.
Collecting the tuition is nothing I would love to do.
No one liked it.
I just want to say I'm Alex Hsu. I started a company called School Frontiers about 26 years ago, and what we do is we try and help schools fulfill their mission and vision through goal setting, strategic planning, data analysis. So data is part of my life, and what we try to do is think about the data that are most useful for people. So whether it's parents, administrators, teachers, kids. So I'd like to put out an idea of accountability, and we'll get to financial accountability. That's certainly a big part of it, of what we're doing. But the idea that accountability really is about caring. Okay, so what do we care about? These are the things that hopefully we're measuring. So if you take a look at what is being measured, a lot of it is what some people care about, but not what other people care about. And I would say that one of the things that we're trying to do in schools is teach kids how to care. So how do we use information to help kids learn how to care about themselves, help teachers learn how to care about those kids, help school leaders be able to focus. And one of the reasons I got into this whole area is because I saw a bunch of kids in schools in New Haven that no one seemed to be caring about. They were showing up every day, but they were sitting in the back of the class. They weren't given anything meaningful to work on. And I volunteered in the schools and tried to help out, but I was the only person from my college who had even gone into that building to help out. And so my college was also not caring about the school that was literally 2 blocks away. And so I thought to myself, well, someone has to have information about these kids. Somebody's got to be tracking them. Somebody's got to understand that they're sitting in the back of the class, they're getting nothing. In any case, so I started to think, where's the information? Who has it? You know, how can we get it to the hands of the people who can do the best with it? So that's my sort of orientation towards information. You know, how can we make it most useful to serve the kids to the best of their ability? I would like to get into getting information to parents.
Let me just jump in
Yes, sir.
on CARES. One of the ways to have students care about their academic achievement is to show them where they're good, where they're being successful. A lot of the new tools out there, specifically I'll talk out about map testing or using IXL, they're not just measuring what is your math score, what's your science score, what's your reading score. They're measuring specific types of problems. And so you can delve down into specifics. Good at multiplication, not good at multiplication in word problems. Good at this versus that. And you can use that data not only to help teachers do a better job of teaching the areas where the whole class is deficient, but also by highlighting to the students the areas where they are doing good. And by building them up, and hopefully if they feel successful, they're going to care a little bit more.
That's a great point. This idea of deficit thinking versus, sort of superpowers, which is what we just heard about before. We can always measure kids by things that they haven't gotten to, but if we can show them over time where their development is, and they become accountable to themselves. So there's the student accountability to themselves. There's teachers' accountability to their job. There's leaders' accountability to their job, and then there's parents' accountability to the betterment of the kids in the community, and then the community has a responsibility too. If you put all these things together, there's a great model by a psychologist named Yuri Bronfenbrenner who created this idea of ecocultural niches. You're part of this, that's part of this, that's part of this. Everything has an influence on that, and where are you as a community member, contributing? And hopefully we have some information to give us an idea of where that is. I wanted to ask the audience, since it's supposed to be a fireside chat. So when you hear the word accountability, anything come to mind? Yes.
I was just sitting here wondering about that exactly. When I hear accountability, I think of the gap between what educators and parents think accountability looks like versus what our legislators think accountability looks like. And I was wondering if you use data on, or generate data. Thank you. Okay, I can stop using my teacher voice. I was wondering if you can generate data, or if you do, for legislators, what their wants and needs are, and how can we make that more congruent with the things that we usually measure?
Yes, I'm in Florida. I'm in Miami. Florida
Bless
has
your
an
heart.
incredibly generous school choice program currently. That school choice program has obviously led to an explosion in private school enrollment, charter school enrollment over the past 5 years. This state does require us to use certain standardized testing. It gives us a range. We don't have to use a specific test, but we do have to submit that. But in addition to that, I am very involved on a state level, missions to Tallahassee to lobby the legislature to continue certain types of legislation. And in those conversations with the lawmakers, they're constantly saying there are a bunch of crummy schools that are getting the state funding and aren't delivering. So there are conversations going on about how to align standards of some level of ensuring that the kids are actually getting something that's worthwhile and the state legislature. And there's a bit of a tag going on right now. The problem is coming up with a standard that's going to fit such a wide range of schools.
I enjoyed the question because people need information that's understandable and that they can digest and try and turn it into action, and trying to get legislatures to focus on anything in particular when they all enjoy arguing with each other means they don't spend a lot of time trying to digest information. So one of the things we've been trying to do, and I come from a project-based learning orientation, really, even though a lot of what I do is work with standardized testing. And I've always tried to expand the idea of what we can understand about what kids need and what they're learning. So one of the things we're trying to do is make that information more accessible. And so I've realized that we have hundreds of thousands of data points being generated by every school every year. And especially in a place like Florida, where now you have multiple different assessments you can use and things like that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But like one test you might use that had, benchmarks that you do regularly in a school of just 300 kids could generate, say, 36,000 data points for just that one test for that 1 year. And so who's cleaning that? Like who's dealing with all those numbers? At the end of the day, some people are like, just tell me, is it a good school or a bad school? I have people walk up to me and say that. I have to find a school for my kid. Can you tell me if it's a good school or a bad school? I'm like, yeah, it's a good school for certain people, not necessarily for you, though. So where do you get the information? So one of the things we've been trying to do is make information more visual, so that it's a little bit easier to do, to understand, and also for legislators and for parents and for actually the school leaders themselves. And so we create these dashboards. And one of the things we're trying to make it easy to use, so like a state legislator in somewhere in Florida, like Broward County or something like that, could like pull up all these schools that are in their county, and if they want to see like how are they doing versus Orlando, whatever the county is there. Something with a D. In any case, Disney County. In any case, it is. They can make those sort of comparisons. They can drill down themselves. So one of the issues is a lot of this information just hasn't been thought of in terms of the user. We're collecting all this information. Anybody here run a school or has run a school? Well, when you're in that position, there's a lot of information that's being collected, and it goes here because you have to respond about federal programs, and it goes here because you have to make sure these math teachers have what they were asking, and then it all ends up in a giant jumble, and no one's really sort of like put it together. So one of the things we've realized is that we have to put it together for them, and that's one thing that we're doing. So working with I'm in Pennsylvania, so working with Pennsylvania, but we work in a whole bunch of different states, and I can tell you, working with a bunch of states, each state has their own somewhat useful, somewhat not useful way of accessing information about, how the schools are doing. And they could all benefit from talking with each other more also about information and also setting priorities. But in any case, I hope that got to some of your question. I think synthesizing is something that we don't do enough of.
One thing that schools are moving towards is, instead of calling it a standardized test, it's an assessment. So we're no longer doing one test a year. We are doing an assessment multiple times a year, and that way we're getting more data points. We currently have now taken an abridged version of that same assessment test that we're doing with our students, and we give it to all new incoming students. So we are coming in knowing exactly where those kids are are holding so that the teachers are more prepared to actually bring those students along. We do not use it for acceptance or denial into the school. That we don't do. It's really just about knowing where they are academically so we can help be ready to hit the ground running when they join the school. So that's another element of it.
Yeah, make a comment about that. I mean, you have 760 souls to deal with in your school. That's a lot of information, and so yeah, hopefully we can get to a place where we can use the information a little bit better. You're already using it for diagnosis, and then tracking, but ultimately you want a framework for how to bring in information and reduce the amount of information to things that are just usable. Any other thoughts about accountability or measurement out there? No? Oh, yes, we have another one. Yes, sir. I can hear you here.
All right, so my question is, I know we do benchmark assessments, like you said, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and then sometime towards the end. My question has always been, wouldn't it make more sense rather than doing benchmarks? Those 3 benchmark tests, but using the real time data as a school, and especially for like in grade bands, more specifically, to ensure that students are getting what they need before those benchmarks come, and then be able to make those changes in real time.
Yeah, I'm gonna let him go into the data part, but what happens is that you now have an operational problem, and that is, let's say you've got multiple classes in the same grade, and those 2 teachers aren't going at the exact same pace, right? So now you've got an operational problem of getting that data in real time that's usable, because that is the idea behind some of the online-based learning programs, the IXL and others like that. So it's self-paced, and you're able to maintain real-time data on each individual student. And even though I'm a pretty early adapter of technology, I don't think we've actually seen the benefit of technology adaptation in education playing out in actual gains in education. It helps when you're trying to differentiate amongst a bunch of students and you just don't have the ability to teach them all. But I don't think we've actually seen tremendous gains in adopting those systems.
Thank you.
There's a dream. There was a book that was written called School's Out, which was written back at the sort of advent of the internet becoming ubiquitous in the 1990s. And basically he said, well, we have an old model of school. It's a factory model, and it was made to do certain things. And those things were really to get you up to sort of minimum competency for things that you needed to follow directions for. Basically to work in a factory. There were certain people who didn't ever go through those systems. They had private schools or apprenticeship schools that were based on different models. But the grand model of traditional education, now it's traditional, was to do certain things, and it did that quite well. And we had an extremely productive system. So there you go. The education system in America, #1, fantastic, great. Brought in people from all over the world, taught them how to create amazing factories and work them very well. Well, then this book argues, well, now we don't need that anymore. We have a different world, and we have different ways of communicating. So we need to just blow that all up and start all over again, and we need to have information coming to us about how to be an internet based communicator, a collaborator across worlds, let's do that. Okay, great, let's do that. How do we do that? Well, we have to take all the teachers that we have and tell them, forget how you learned, forget what happened to you when you were second grade, which was great. You loved it. It worked. You're here as a teacher because you loved your education. But actually, you can't do that anymore. We got to do other things. We got to value other things. Collaboration, communication, all of the ISTE standards. Is anybody familiar with the ISTE, the International Society for Technology Education standards? As it's based on those general principles of communication, collaboration, and all these things that we need in order to be sort of world-class citizens. In any case, so one of our biggest problems, I think, is we had teachers who fell in love with a system that doesn't help us as much anymore. So how do we help them fall in love with creating a new kind of student, a new kind of world? Some would say, oh, you just wait till the current, cadre of teachers dies off, and then we'll have new teachers who were, but I'll say, like, the model is very, it's very constructed, and we have an accountability system that basically rewards schools for being more productive in the traditional sense. So
I'll tell you about a story. There's a school in New Jersey, a high school, that decided to be completely project-based learning. So 1 year for the entire high school, the school bought a food truck. They bought an empty food truck. And the entire curriculum for the entire school year was figuring out this food truck. They had to write the business model. They had to decide what they were going to do. They had to negotiate with vendors. They had to get the permit from the city. They had to maintain the truck. And the whole thing, and it was just a one project, truly amazing. They spent the entire year running this, I'll get to you in a second, running this and that, and every single element of it, whether it was writing, math, accounting, they had to build a website, they had to build apps, they had to do social media, they had to do everything around this food truck. To me, I heard it from the head of school, and I was completely blown away. Like, really, just what an amazing way to learn all these skills. Well, I'm sad to say that school closed down. Why? Parents were too worried that their kids wouldn't get into the Ivy League school they wanted to get into because the school wouldn't recognize the education they were getting through this method. All right, go ahead. You had a question.
So what I was wondering is, since technologies like OpenAI and ChatGPT and Google Bard and Google Gemini have emerged, so since platforms like OpenAI, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, since they have emerged in the marketplace, what I was wondering is, have there been changes and reforms and policies to allow AI to be integrated successfully into classrooms and into curriculum development, and what have the consequences been for schools that have not implemented those changes, those policy changes?
I can tell you some things, and then we'll hear from the private school perspective. So I have done lectures on AI in schools to teachers and school leaders. So I saw it coming, and I said, this is something you guys got to know, right? You got to know what your kids are doing because they're doing it. They're going to go out and they're going to use these things to answer their math questions and help them understand topics like very difficult topics like gravity, if they're doing that, then you need to know about it and maybe start to incorporate it. So we started talking about some of those things. As far as policy, we still have a very individually oriented assessment system. So people doing projects, there's no value, I think, to a certain extent in collaboration, because it's like, hey, take the ACT. I was like, all right, I'll take it with my friend. We were collaborating yesterday. They're like, no, it's all you. I was like, well, you're not going to measure who I am. I am in my community. I'm a member. I'm a contributing person. I don't do all that stuff. My friend does that stuff, and I do this stuff. So we'll say, well, sorry, you have to get something on verbal and something on your math and whatever. And so, we don't have great measures how kids collaborate with technology or with each other. I will say that just since you brought up AI, and it's a big topic of this conference, one of the things that I'll just put out a little dream here, and that is I want to make teachers' jobs easier. Really, as we heard earlier, teachers' jobs are very complicated, and it leads to a huge amount of burnout. And so, why should we take a whole group of people who are very excited about doing something and then like crush their spirit? It's very expensive in our society to lose all these teachers. And so I was thinking, okay, well, how can we use AI and all this data that we're collecting to make their jobs easier? And so like, well, we now have verbal interaction AI tools. So what if we can make like a C3PO character and we say like, okay, so I want to know, how Bob is doing. Bob, one of the 760 students in school. I want to know how Bob is doing in math, and whether there are things that have been happening with Bob that have not, that have been sort of like keeping him from going in that direction that we had already talked about, and so then the C3PO character says, well, yes, actually, Bob is very, oriented towards algebra, but really doesn't get statistics. And how do I know that? Because over the last 3 years, statistics has sort of started out okay, but then gone down. And so it's like, so in real time, telling you about this person, say like, well, actually, is Bob, one of the reasons he hasn't gotten, statistics is because every time we have a statistics lesson, he stays home from school. And so it's like, oh, okay, I get it. All right. In that case, what can I do? And it says, well, here's the thing that Bob really likes, algebra. Here's how we can connect it to statistics. And so like maybe try this. Okay, well, then you've got like a teacher coach who's actually doing the data analysis and helping you. But it really isn't something super spectacular. It isn't like a giant mentor. It really is using all of that kid's information that we've been collecting and making it more accessible, more useful for the teachers.
I want to mention three things. One is it's directly impacting our curriculum. So we know, despite the fact that people can use one of the AI tools to help them write an essay, and there's nothing wrong with that per se, but we are doing a lot more writing assignments in class where they don't have access to it, because we want them to still learn the core competency of writing. So we are doing a lot of in-time writing in class, and that means there's no more homework. We have a lot less homework than we have in the past because we're spending the time in class doing a lot of writing, and we're doing that in all the subjects, whether that's math class or English class or history class or in my case, some of the Judaic studies. We're having them write, and we're spending a lot of time in class doing that. That is going to help them, even if it's writing the prompt to the AI. We also then assume any homework that we're given, that is given for being done at home, absolutely can be used with AI, and we have no problem with that. So we spend time teaching students how to check the work and try and figure that out. Some interesting, differences between the different AI models on that. Perplexity, as an example, will quote the source for everything, whereas ChatGPT won't. That's an interesting idea. That's number one. Number two, you can come to me afterwards. I'll show you. There are a few companies that are specifically building AI models for schools. So one of them is designed around helping teachers build their course outline and their lesson plans. So that's a great way that teachers can utilize that, and they can follow up with that. Okay, I'm trying to teach X, Y, Z. Give me ideas, give me examples, give me funny stories of how I can express that. So there are some AI models that do that. And one of the things Alex was mentioning here, and this is a real challenge for us. In school, we have an SIS, Student Information System, and that's tracking grades and attendance, maybe discipline. We had a nice chat about that. Then we have a separate system that's keeping track of our assessment tools, right? How do we put that together and be able to run the report that Alex is saying, right? I want a whole 24/7 picture or 180-degree picture of student X, right? Can we figure out a system that's going to pull the SIS data, that's going to pull the assessment data, that's going to pull whatever other data we're collecting, and put that together and give us those insights? I think there's a great opportunity for that. We're not there yet. I don't know of any schools that really do have that yet. I think that's what he's referring to.
Yes, and I think like that's because these systems, these data systems are not built by teachers and school administrators. They're built by people who need to respond to certain things, usually reporting to government agencies. And this is where the accountability to government agencies is an issue, because we spend so much time collecting information report for government agencies, and that's fine. I wouldn't want to not do that, because I think removing accountability from public education system is going to be a potential disaster for certain groups of kids. But how do we make it more useful? The people who know how to make it the most useful are the teachers and the administrators. So if we can get them involved, which we do in our more sort of collaborative, strategic planning, data analysis stuff, if we can get them more involved in what is it they need, what would be ideal, what would be helpful to them. We still have the reporting, but we could build these tools to make it more sort of universally structured. And we're actually doing that with a school that's for kids with emotional disabilities currently. But I will say it's a challenge because like David said, the information is here, and the information is here, and the information is here. A lot of it's in paper form, which is horrible for us, not for them. But but how do we take it and make it more useful? I say, like, all of this can be done. It really can be. And you say, well, this is a huge expense. Like, how are we gonna spend this much money? I say, well, we're already spending $2 billion in this country every year on just standardized testing. So I think we can find a way to make these data sources work better. It just requires creative thinking.
Yeah. So I'll throw out another topic I mentioned briefly at the beginning. Was I want to really encourage everyone, regardless of exactly what your jobs are. I want to encourage you guys to reach out to your competitors and see what you can do together in a transparent manner. So again, from my perspective, I reached out to the school that is the school we are most closely competitive with, and we now have quarterly meetings. The leadership at both schools get together quarterly. We've coordinated on our calendars. We've coordinated on different programs that we can do together. And even though we compete pretty fiercely for students, that hasn't stopped us from having a great relationship. That's also now extending to the community. The community now knows that we work together, and we're not going to stab each other in the back. We're going to work together. So I've started those conversations with them. Hey, we want to publish our standardized testing results. Will you join us? Very reluctant, right? But imagine if we do, we can start pushing each other together, and that in the end of the day, that's going to make the students work better. Same with the financial results. I did publish my financial results. They have not yet. They're under a lot of pressure, right? They're under a lot of pressure, and they are redesigning their entire financial results because of that. It'll take them a couple years to get that, to be able to do it. But in the end of the day, I feel great that I'm helping them push themselves forward. So I would just kind of, a practical takeaway here, I'd encourage you to work with, within your field and with your competitors to try and figure out some transparency and ways that you can work with others to do that, because in the end of the day, that's going to help the product at the end.
I do want to applaud that, because putting information out there about what you're doing can be pretty scary, because information is power, right? I mean, to a certain extent. So
Let me just when I published my financials, I scheduled an open house for any of my parents to come in and question me. It was definitely the most nerve-wracking moment. So let me tell you how many parents showed up. 0.
Right.
Literally 0.
Nerve-wracking, but
Right. So it's the greatest thing that ever happened to the school, because since nobody showed up, no one can ask me any questions, because I say, if you really cared, you would have been there, right? And you know what? No one's asked me any questions since then, right? No one's questioned the finances of the school.
Well, I think that makes a good point, which is that a lot of times we are most afraid of things that actually don't happen. So it's like, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. You know, what are the consequences? They could be terrible. And we're by nature, I think, people are envision the worst possible consequences in order to protect themselves. But a lot of times that just isn't true. It's not going to happen. And if it does, you know, we're strong enough to deal with that. Anyone else have a measurement issue that they had that they thought, oh, measuring this thing is difficult or not going to be possible, you know, or a success story about measuring something? I know we saw some surveys earlier. There's one back there.
I do not know, not the measuring, but I have one of my, as I mentioned before, I have 3 kids. One of them is doing her junior year in Italy, Milan. As you know, I don't know if anybody's aware, but in Italy, the kids they need to choose before going into high school. They already need to choose the career that they're going to go into it, which I think is a lot of pressure. Because we put, my daughter at that point said, okay, I'm going to go into science. So we put her into science. I mean, now the year, she's not only dealing with the language. Thankfully, she understands Italian, but she doesn't write it. Now, the difference is that we did with her dad, it's that we have 2 here going in the same, same school year. And over there, she said, Mom, I do not have to write. I mean, I have to write my homework, my presentation. I have to present it. All the time is presentation plus the writing. So it's like what here, you see the presentation, you write it, but presentation, but she was like, they're pushing too much presentation. Now, back again now going into one of my sons, he's taking AP classes on physics. Their dad is a physicist. And he goes and he tells me, I don't even know how to help him because I tried to explain, I don't even know how to do that. So I cannot imagine. I mean, he's only 16. I'm a physicist. I'm working in the field. And the problems that they do, it is so hard. I don't even remember getting anything when I was in a school like that. So it is so 2 different, ways. But I mean, as he said, one of the things in Italy, and because he went to Italy, he studied in Italy, he said one of the good things in Italy is that they work a lot in the theory. But in the States, we do a lot of hands-on. We have the technology, we do that. So it's pretty kind of like, you're kind of amazed how different it is, but also depending on what school they're going to. Because the high schools here, they're talking about everything. It's pretty much you're finding yet what you're going to go to college for. Over there, they had already have to decide it.
There's lots of different education models. One thing that I like to do, as you probably heard earlier, is develop more models for people. I work with private schools, charter schools, creating new opportunities because, there are a lot of different kind of kids who learn in a lot of different kind of ways, and organizationally, you can't design one kind of school to help every single kid. One issue that I always have is if you wait 4 years to address a kid's educational differences or whatever, then they may never come back. So 4 years lost in elementary school or high school is sort of devastating. So
Kids don't
different
get a
models.
do-over. That
Yeah,
kid
yeah.
doesn't get to redo 3rd grade. If you have a bad teacher in that year, right, don't wait till the end of the year to change the teacher so you can get a better teacher next year. Change right now. That kid, those 20 kids in that class, they don't get a do-over. Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
terrible.
I know Dr. Luff was talking about his educational experience and thinking, well, I had bad teachers for 12 years. Jeez. And fortunately, I had a few more than that. We had another question in the back. I think probably have time for one more question.
Just like to connect the issues of AI and what can be done with faculty members. School districts, standard school districts, and I realize that's not the only type of education we're talking about, but There's a lot of them still, and they are notoriously bad or inconsistent about gathering intel from their own workers, including teachers. And so I know that a lot of corporations still use focus groups, and I wonder if you have seen any evidence in policy that might suggest some ways of improving gathering what teachers' perceptions are of this coming trend and these coming skills that they're going to need and their kids are going to need, and how to build that into policy by doing focus groups or from maybe people who actually know how to do those, not internal school district folks necessarily.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is the accreditation organizations are requiring surveys as part of the accreditation process, and those surveys have to be to parents as well as to staff. And in those staff surveys, obviously it's always a bit dangerous when you're putting an open-ended survey to anyone. Typically, you're only going to get the negative feedback. So one of the areas that the focus is trying to drive them towards those types of things. Okay, looking forward, how do we change? How are things changing? What can we incorporate? But you're right, unfortunately, on a district level, that is, they're definitely behind. But the charter schools, the private schools, as far as the accreditation process, they are much more in line with that idea.
One last quick comment, because I know we're being shuffled off the stage as we should be, and that is that yes, we need to have school leaders who are less afraid of feedback or feed forward or whatever you want to call it, because a lot of them think, oh, this is going to be difficult for me. I've got too much to deal with. But in fact, we don't have a school if we don't have a collaborative, problem-solving community. So getting that information from focus groups and surveys and things like that, as painful as they can be, if you ask your kid, am I a good parent? Guess what you would get. But in any case, you might get some good information there. So yeah, working with the school leaders is one thing that we should do. Anyway, thank you. Very nice. Thank you.